was that? Could you hear him okay? Everybody's muted.
I think whatever he did to your microphone, he did a good job. That's one of the best sounds that you've had.
Cool. I
Yeah.
didn't have the settings correct either, but he had to go into settings too and do some things that apparently I had undone. But I wasn't familiar with some of the settings on the microphone, and he was, so that's probably what it was.
Very good.
The clarity of the sound was really good. Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. So, Laura, do you want to introduce Bob?
Sure. Many years ago, I heard about a near-death experience group that met once a month at University of Connecticut. And so I started going, and Bob and another woman that was on one of our Zooms a couple years ago, Tina Angeli, who spoke about her NDE, they ran the group pretty much with another gentleman. And I just found it very interesting. I used to go every month, and different speakers they were just so interesting. And they still go on, but it's a Zoom. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But if anybody's interested, I can send them the link when I get it each month. Sometimes it's just a share, and sometimes it's a speaker. And Bob is also an old friend from the Martha Miranda days.
Right.
And we knew each other then. We have a lot of common friends. And so I was, when we were talking about all that stuff, I thought, oh, he's a neighbor of mine. And I will ask him if he'd like to come and tell us about his NDEs. So this is
Awesome.
Bob Leo.
Very good.
Great. Thank you, Laura.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the introduction.
Yeah. Do you want your slides up now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So I thought what I would do is talk about near-death experiences in general, and then I can talk about my two experiences. So the term was coined in 1975 by Raymond Moody in his book Life After Life. But near-death experiences have gone back for thousands of years. And one example is Plato in the Republic. He talks about the tale of Now, was a soldier that was killed in a battle, and they had his body on this big funeral pyre with a bunch of other dead, soldiers. And after 10 days, his body had not decomposed, and he came back to life. And he told the story of that he went somewhere up in the sky, and he was with a bunch of elders, and he saw people who had died on Earth go in front of the elders, and some of them, they said, you had a great life, you helped people, and they sent them higher in the sky into another lifetime that was pleasurable. But some people had a life that was not good, that was negative, and they were sent down below Earth into a less desirable place. And he was sent back to tell people, that there's a choice based on your life, what's going to happen to you when you die. And just the definition of an NDE, most people use something like this. It's a distinctive subjective experience that minority people report. And, either you're clinically dead, near death, or a situation where death is likely. But Raymond Moody said later that he regretted that he had the word death in there, that some people have a spiritual transformation and that they experience something very similar. So we'll go to the next slide. So, and we talked a little bit about this before, but I would say 85% of the people have a pleasurable NDE. They feel love, joy, peace, and bliss on the other side. They feel just, they're comforted. They don't want to come back. But a small percentage, including a number of people that have tried suicide, tell us about reports that are negative, actually. And then there's questions about the scientists. Some scientists do not believe in NDEs. They believe that as you die, the oxygen to your brain is cut off. And when you see the light, the tunnel, it's because you're losing the oxygen and then you're passing out. But I have a couple of stories that really dispute that. For example, one of the people that came to the NDE group, and maybe this is one, Laura, that you mentioned, was a person that talked about a story in Boston. There was a fellow that was blind from birth. He lived in a group home and he developed pneumonia and he was very ill and they sent him to this hospital in Boston. And during the night he started to choke and he couldn't breathe and he had a near-death experience. Now he never had seen in his life and he was out of his body. He was floating above the room, looking at his body down. Then he floated out of the hospital building and he was hovering over Boston near the hospital. And then he described what he saw. For the first time in his life, he saw things. There was an intersection. There were two cars. There was a car accident. And he described details in this car accident that later were validated. And then he came back into his body and he was blind again, but he lived. So in a case like that, if it was the oxygen cutting off, he wouldn't have been able to go out of his body. He wouldn't have been able to see anything outside the hospital. There's a friend of mine named Dave Moquin from Westfield, Mass. And he had a near-death experience. He was in a hospital in Springfield, Mass. And they thought he was dying. And, he was out of his body, watching the doctors. Then he saw somewhere else, an office building, his doctor talking to the family, saying, "We don't think Dave's going to make it. We're doing the best we can, but it looks very bad." And then he went down, out of his body to Florida, where his parents were at something like equivalent to clam bake. And his father started choking on his piece of lobster, and he had to get the Heimlich maneuver. And then he was telling his parents later about, "I saw this person gave you this, you talked about this and this," and it was all validated. So if this was oxygen just cutting off, you wouldn't have been able to go outside your body and see things like that. But there are some scientists that really just don't believe this at all. And so it's, people make up their minds. So go to the next slide. Spiritual explanations. I mean, a number of people feel this is the afterlife. When you die, you go through this tunnel and you see, maybe loved ones on the other side. And sometimes you have telepathy, you talk with them and things like that. So it suggests the existence of a soul or a consciousness, that's separate from the physical body. There's common features of an NDE. There's probably like maybe 15. Not everybody has all of them. I had some. There's an organization called IANS, International Association of Near-Death Studies. And it was created because when people used to have NDEs, they would come out of, surgery or whatever, they would wake up and they would tell the nurse or doctor about it. And the doctor or nurse would say, "Well, you better not tell anyone because they think you're crazy. It was the drugs we gave you that did it." But they said, "No, no, no, I went to the other side. I saw this, I saw that." And so this group was formed to be like really a support group. And that's why different chapters, like in Connecticut, we had it at the University of Connecticut Hospital. And, other places with medical facilities have formed groups like this. But some of the things that have happened is like out-of-body experience I mentioned. You kind of pop out of your body and then you're looking around. And, quite often it happens you're in the corner of a room looking down. And then, sometimes you go outside the room and things like that. Telepathy, this is when a person talks, not verbally, but, mentally with some other living being or maybe higher spirit. Next slide, please. After death communication, you might be in the presence of a loved one when you pass to the other side or something in the NDE. And when I say loved one, it's not that you would necessarily see this person and recognize them just because, oh, I recognize your face or something. Sometimes they're like balls of energy. But when you get near them, you can sense who it is. There's a tunnel of light. A number of people have talked about going through the tunnel, and they come out into this beautiful, warm, loving, and inviting light. There's a life review. There's several types of life review. I had one. In my case, I could see different spots in my life, like milestones or things that happen, and I could see how people reacted to it. Now, some people have talked a little bit about a different one where, maybe they did something bad to somebody they hurt their feelings or hurt them physically, and they didn't realize it till now. You feel that you're in the shoes of the other person, and you relive, this is something I did, and I just had no idea I was impacting others. You may have encounter with deceased loved ones. Knowledge of the nature of the universe. What this is that a number of people, when they go to the other side through the tunnel, they all of a sudden have all their questions answered. They know everything that has happened or everything that's going to happen. A friend of mine, Al Sullivan, learned the cure for cancer, for example. But when you come back, you forget it. He knew that he knew what the cure was, and all he can remember was had something to do with seaweed. And of course, that didn't help the scientists. But you know everything on the other side. You come back here, you forgot it. On the other side, usually you're very peaceful. You're in this, unconditional love. Some people talked about seeing God, whether it be Jesus, Buddha, based on your cultural background. And God, it really is, what the way it has been described, is this big, bright ball of energy. And then usually what happens, you get returned to your body. And a lot of times when you come back, like in my case, I get slammed into my body. I was in a car accident I'll talk about a little bit later, but I was out of my body. I was just, peaceful, no pain, slammed back my body, and I had all these pains and everything. And I wondered, why did I come back?
Uh,
The next slide. So, there's some major impacts on people. If you've had an NDE, usually you're not afraid of death. You've seen the other side, you realize it's unconditional love, and you're happy if you go back there. Um, there's also altered beliefs. In my case, I was a Catholic, and I went to church, every Sunday. I went to confession. I obeyed all the rules, no meat on Friday. But I didn't really understand why I was doing this. It was more like rote, just go to church, get out of church, that's it. But I became spiritual after my NDE. I stopped going to the church and I started doing more spiritual things. Enhanced empathy. All of a sudden, you put yourself in the other person's shoes and you feel, what are they going through? Is there a way that I could help them? You change your priorities in life. You understand certain things are more important now. It's not just a materialistic world. And divorces, I've read that more than half the people that have had an NDE get divorced within 5 years. And one of the reasons is that, let's say you and your partner are on the same wavelength, and one of you goes and has the NDE. Well, your priorities and things have changed, but the other person has not. And now you're out of whack. You're not in agreement anymore. Next slide. So my first NDE was in a car accident in 1969. Um, I had, been a student all my life. I did very well in school and college. I received a lot of honors. And I had just started working at United Technologies Research Center, and I had a great job. And I was living with my parents because I didn't have enough money to get an apartment yet. And I was coming back from work. I had gotten a new car. It was a small car, and it was icy roads. It had snow the day before, dark conditions. I'm starting to make a left-hand turn into a street near my parents' house, and a little boy runs out in front of me in the road. So I stopped immediately. And then he sees my car, and like a squirrel, he doesn't know which way to go. He starts to go one direction, stops, goes the other direction. Meanwhile, another car, an older car, heavier car is coming down the road. And I realize I'm going to get hit. I can't move my car because he's in the way. And this other car is going to smash into me. And I really thought I was going to die. And here I have a small light car. The other car is moving. I'm not moving. So I'm going to get really smashed hard. And just as the cars approached each other, it seems like there was an absence of time. It seemed like it took almost forever to get hit. And then when I did get hit, there was an absence of noise. And my body was slowly going back and forth in my seat. We had seatbelts then, but no airbags. But I was going back and forth. I had a couple books in the car and they were flying in the air and all that. But it was like slow motion. And again, no sound and two cars crunching together. And I popped out of my body. And now I'm looking down at my body in the car, going back and forth. And there's steam coming from both cars. The radiators were smashed and all the steam coming up. And I had been in severe pain as soon as I got hit. But I popped out of my body. I'm not in any pain. I'm just kind of looking upward and looking at what's going on now. And that's when I had my life review. I had a review of the major milestones of my life, of the things that had happened. And then all of a sudden I was telecommunicating with a higher being. I think it was God, but or spirit. But I'm not sure because I couldn't see them. But I was saying, "Oh, I'm so young. I mean, I don't want to die. I'm too young to die," is what I was saying. And I said, just I've been a student all my life, and now I have this great job. I want to stay here on Earth. And the other spirit, or what was talking to me, said that I was too centered on my life. I was very introverted, and that I had to do things to help other people if I was going to stay there. So it was kind of an agreement. I said, okay, I'll change my life. I'll try and be of help to other people. And then I got slammed back into my body, and that was an intense pain. And of course, police, paramedics showed up and all that. Um, my body, my L5 disc, the very bottom disc of my back, turned out to have been ruptured. We didn't know what happened, but I had sciatic pain for almost a year in both legs. I could barely walk at times, and I was going to see a surgeon, but he was an orthopedic surgeon. He said, "Well, I know you're in a lot of pain. I think it's soft tissue damage." And after a year, he sent me to a neurosurgeon and said right away, "Oh, you got a ruptured disc." So I had the surgery, and then I came out of it, and then the pain went away. But I had to change my life, so I started going to a lot of metaphysical groups. I started going to spiritualist churches. I stopped going to the Catholic Church. My parents and friends wondered why aren't you going to our Catholic Church anymore? And I just said, something's changed. I just don't feel that's right for me. And I started networking. So this was like 1970. I had the surgery, and back then we didn't have emails, but I would go to some events with a metaphysical group. We had talks about parapsychology and that. And I would see that I would go to the group and I would learn that somebody else had a talk the week before. And very few people went because nobody knew about it. So I started collecting flyers and making flyers for people about these metaphysical groups, holistic groups. I started giving them out ahead of time. And then I became known as a networker. And I didn't charge any money, but I did that. And then when email came out, I started sending emails to people about different events in the metaphysical community, and I became known as a networker. And I felt this was part of my role here. Next slide, please. The second NDE happened years later. I had actually gone to metaphysical group, and I came back and I was pumping gas at a gas station, and a couple of days before I had gone to the ER. I had noticed some rectal bleeding, and I had never had that before. And, so I was concerned the people in the ER said, maybe you got a cold, maybe you got some bug going around. Don't worry about it. So anyway, I'm pumping gas coming home at night, and all of a sudden I felt really, really weak. Um, so I stopped the gas pump. I put the pump into the machine, and I was going to put on the cap, uh, and all of a sudden I just got woozy, and I fell to my knees. I cut my lip on the car. The little door opens when you put your gas thing in there. And I cut my lip on that. And then I just fell on the floor, on the ground there by the gas pump. And people came running around me. And there were some people going to an EMT class, thankfully. And, they called 911. And it turned out I had been losing blood ever since I went to the ER. And I was white as a ghost. And so, the ambulance came and they took me to the hospital. And I kept saying to them, I'm bleeding. I've got blood from my lip coming on my shirt. Could you give me I don't know, like a towel or a cloth so I could stop the bleeding? And they wouldn't. I learned later they were trying to see if my blood would clot. They're trying to determine what was going on. Um, Turns out I had diverticulitis. I had a GI bleed, and I ended up actually being in the hospital 9 days, needed 4 pints of blood. But again, I felt death was there because nearby. Because that night they gave me a pint of blood in the hospital. Then later they gave me another pint. That was on a Tuesday night. And on Saturday, I got much worse and I needed 2 pints of blood. And I realized that, going to this NDE group at the Yukon Health Center, one of the stories was by Cindy. She was in a bad car accident in Florida. And she was driving this car. She was drunk. She was out with 3 friends in the car. And she was going fast, around the curve, smashed into a tree. I think at least one of her friends actually died. She broke her neck. So she's in a striker bed in this hospital. Never believed in God, never believed in spirit. And she started yelling out, God, 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 help me. God, God, help me. And all of a sudden, she said that she saw this angel, this massive angel appear, and the angel's wings wrapped around her in the striker bed and just, gave her unconditional love and comforted her. And then, shortly after, she slowly started getting some better. She never got 100%, but she could walk, but she had to limp for the rest of her life. And so I thought about that story. And here I'm in this hospital bed in Manchester, Connecticut. And I called out, God, spirit, whatever, help me, help me. And all of a sudden, I felt something very strange. I had an IV unit in one arm, a blood unit in another arm, and I felt that I and the bed were going straight up. My hair was being brushed back by the air, going straight up, but I never went through the ceiling. And these things in my arm never pulled out. But all of a sudden, I was feeling unconditional love, and I felt much better. And then slowly starting that night, I started to make a slow recovery in the hospital. And again, I received this message that I needed to continue being of help to people, help them get things going, continue to be in the networker. And next slide. And so that's really the talk about my two NDEs, and learning about everybody else going to these hospital things, and learning about other NDEs and Anita Margerani, Lee Lawrence. There's so many great stories out there. I don't know if anyone has any questions or not, or
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. How long was it between the two NDEs?
well, the first one was like 1969.
Okay.
The second one was 2007.
Okay. Interesting. And do you feel like you were reminded to carry forward your ministry of
I
good
did,
deeds?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe I had slacked off near the end, and all of a sudden they're saying, "Hey, you got to get back on it. If you're going to stay here, on
Yep.
Earth, you got to do this." It wasn't
Interesting.
that I was a bad person, but I was just so introverted, and I just focused my whole life on my studies,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of life that I ignored. So it kind of kicked me out to the real world.
Yep.
So, Bob, it sounds like your first NDE was a spiritual experience for you and it changed your whole life. Do you have any thoughts about what took place that made you change everything? What changed your beliefs?
Um, well, being so logically minded, and when I was in school, I took science and math, and I ignored kind of the fine arts. If I could have a science course, I would take that, and everything had to be logically proved. So when I had this NDE, it opened up a whole world about you have to accept things on faith. There's things that you can't prove scientifically, and that was a big switch for me right there. Because when I was working at the research center, again, you've got to prove everything scientifically. You can't say this is going to do this on faith. You got to show the steps. Here's how it was before. Here's how it was after. Here's the steps I take, and they have to be repeatable too. And now, I'm doing things metaphysically, saying, well, with mediumship, for example, I started going to mediumship classes in spiritualist churches, and I learned a lot. I became very active in the spiritualist churches for years.
So, did you see God in your experience? I mean, what actually changed you from a left brain scientist to a right brain person who now has faith?
Did I see God? No, but I had the telepathy. I felt I was talking to God. So even though
Oh,
I didn't
nice.
see God per se, my conversation, I believed, was with God. And then over time, for example, I became a docent at the Britain Museum of American Art. I help out at a hospital for special care in Britain, where many of the people are quadriplegics. I help them with art. I help them, set up art displays in the hospital. So, instead of just being left brain all the time, I forced myself to become more right brain. Let's try to do things with art. Let's try to help people, as opposed to being just, looking at myself. I'm still kind of introverted, but at least if I go to a holistic group, I feel more at ease. I feel that I can talk with people. And, by going to spiritualist churches, that opened up so many things. I became a dowser. I've been a dowser for many years. I would go to the dowser conventions up in Vermont, and, there they would have a lot of healers. So I learned about holistic healing. I learned about different modalities of healing. I became, Reiki. I took Reiki 1 and 2. And, with my tuning forks on dowsing, I could look at somebody's body with a tuning fork and say, oh, there's something different on your shoulder. Is that bothering you? And then you could do some healing, maybe Reiki or whatever, and then use your tuning forks again and see, is there a difference? Have I noticed that, the healing did something?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your answer. I'm always curious about how people change, because change, as you know, is the hardest thing that we could do. And I think that's why people are afraid of death, is they're afraid of change. And the spiritualists call it the change called death, right?
Right. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So as um, you're the classic model of being still pliable enough to change, because many people have had NDEs and they haven't changed at all. And so to me, that's the miracle of your NDE. It's not so much that you came back, it wasn't your time, we get that. But it's the fact that it was able to make such an imprint on your life that you found so much more to life than you had before. And so to me, that was the miracle. And thank you for sharing it with us. It's beautiful.
Right. So instead of becoming religious, like I was religious, I became spiritual.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was the big change for me. But when I was going to the Catholic Church, I mean, we would say these prayers, and I would just say them by rote, by memory, and I didn't really necessarily know what I was saying. You just say it and memorize something, then you walk out of church and you're done.
Yeah.
But now here I am trying to understand what I'm saying, and why does this apply?
Yeah, to me, that's huge.
Yeah.
That is huge. That was a huge spiritual awakening that you had.
And it's
Thank you.
unfortunate that it takes such a disruption to shake us up enough to wake up to that.
Right, and so, but some people don't need an NDE because I got hit over the head with a 2x4, but maybe somebody else would slowly understand themselves. They would change on their own
Yeah.
without needing that to happen to them.
Understanding both worlds is so valuable, especially when you're trying to communicate spiritual attitudes to people who may have scientific backgrounds, because you
Yeah.
can speak in both worlds. And so to me, it's perfect. What you've been through is just amazing. And the fact that you're sharing it is even more amazing. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're welcome. Yes. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you, Laura, for inviting me.
You're welcome. I think I had a spiritual awakening. My change came when I spent 2 weeks with my mother in hospice, the last 2 weeks of her life. She was in Iowa and I lived in Connecticut, and I hadn't gone to church for years. I didn't even have my daughter baptized because I felt hypocritical because I didn't belong to any church. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to wait until she's an adult and let her choose herself if she wants to get baptized. But anyway, during those 2 weeks that I spent with my mother, I had many very interesting experiences through her, through what she was going through, because she would talk to me about it. I mean, I slept right next to her on the couch when she was in the hospital bed in the middle of the living room, and she had all these strange dreams about, well, she thought they were dreams. I found out later that they were actually visitations, that she was traveling back and forth between the two worlds. And how it was explained to me was they were preparing her for the final journey so she wouldn't be afraid, because she was terrified of death. And so she had these dreams about angels coming to get her ready to go. They dressed her in a white dress, put flowers in her hair, and then they left. And when she woke up, she was crying because she wanted to go with them, and they didn't take her. And and another time she said she met JFK, and she loved JFK, and she met him, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty strange. And then another time she saw 4 chairs in front of her, and when we 4 red velvet chairs, and I said, well, was somebody sitting in them? And she said, no, it was for you and your 2 sisters and dad. when we went to the cemetery under the tent, there were 4 red velvet chairs right in front of the casket.
Wow.
And so after that happened, I kept asking for a sign. All for like a year, I kept asking for a sign that she was okay. And I started collecting angels because of the story that she told me about those 3 angels. And so I started collecting angels, and a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go to a talk at, remember Borders and Books? They're not around anymore, but there was a woman going to be talking about angels. So I went to it, and she passed around a bag and had everybody write their name on a piece of paper and put it in the bag. And at the end of the service, she said, "Okay, I'm going to draw a name now because I'm guided by my guides before I do a lecture that I need to bring a gift for someone, and it will mean something to them." And so she drew my name. Now, things like that never used to happen to me, but she drew my name and she gave me this little gift, and it was a little porcelain angel. And she said, she got all teary-eyed when she handed it to me, and she said, "You know who this is from. You've been asking for this."
Wow.
And that was the turning point for me. I started going to lectures about life after life. I got into Reiki. I got into hospice care, and and all these groups, all these different groups. That was my change, because I had been an athlete and an exercise instructor my whole life, and all of a sudden, and never went to church, and all of a sudden now I'm into this whole spiritual world. I'm loving it, and here I am in the Madonna Ministries.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Laura.
Mom. Thank your mom.
Yeah, absolutely. And they tell me that she's always with me when I'm doing the hospice work. And
Well,
and one woman told me that she saw my mother,
Yeah.
and I'd never met the woman before ever. And she's like, "Oh, your mom is here, and she's beautiful." Yeah, that was quite a confirmation for me too. And I just got chills telling that whole story about my mom. And I learned in one of those classes that that means that it's true, that it really happened. If you get a chill, so
Interesting.
I get chills every time I tell that story.
Nice. And I imagine with
So,
Bob and the energetic art in the background that might be some lingering essence.
Yeah.
that's a good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Bob,
Bob,
this is
oh,
Katrina. You can't see me because
Uh,
my camera is not on. But I am curious with your NDEs, have you had any have you experienced like changes in yourself physically? Like, do you see anything differently? Do you feel or hear things differently that kind of align with somebody who has somewhat crossed over and come back? Does that make sense, that question to you?
Um, I suppose so. I would say that I'm more open to things like that. Before I had my NDE, again, trying to prove everything logically, I wouldn't have believed in any of that. So that my NDE forced me really to start going to spiritual groups, the spiritualist church. I started taking classes. Um, and, I became more open to spirit, to messages from the other side, to receiving messages from the other side on my own sometimes. I took a number of classes at the Willimantic Spiritualist Church, and it was like on a Wednesday night, they had different instructors, and then we would have the circle, the message circle. So it made me become open to that.
Okay. So I guess maybe more so like my question is like, so when like I haven't had any NDEs like you, but I get visitations from family, friends, for example. Like I smelled my mom for like years before it's finally faded away. There's just a scent that was always in her home, and I'd be like, my mom is here, right? Or there
Mhm.
was a time when after my grandma passed, and she was like my mom, she came to visit me with my grandma because she was my great grandma. She came to visit me with the grandma I never met before. And I remember being like, oh my God, who is this lady? She keeps staring at me. And then my daughter woke up the next day and was like, Mom, grandma came to visit me in my dream. And I was like, me too. She was here. And I was like, did you see this lady? But I guess, are you able to read people? Are you able, have you found that your physical or like your spiritual senses have developed even more also in accordance with you being more open to the different things that you're doing now with the spiritualist church? Like, has your psychic development like increased in any way?
I would say yes. I mean, since I had that first NDE
Mm,
by going to spiritual church, and we did things where you hold somebody's keys or something, and you all of a sudden you get feelings from them, or I have a
mhm.
gut feel when I meet somebody. My intuition is saying, this is good, this is bad, whatever.
That
You
is it. Yes.
know,
Okay. So that's what I was getting because I'm like, it to me, it just seems like you're changed. And sometimes you're changed in ways you don't even realize you're changed until you sit there and you're like, huh, yeah, that's exactly what I do. Like you can go and you're reading a room of people without even realizing it. This person may need my help or a kind word or whatever that is. That's your increased I don't want to say psychic ability, but kind of that's what it is, right? And
right?
it's in
Yeah,
line
your
with your
awareness. Yeah,
right, your awareness, and it's in line with your mission to do more things to help people. Like you were saying, like I always just find that really like amazing when I talk to people who have NDEs. Because sometimes you don't even realize that you're operating on like a higher frequency, and that's so that you can do the work that you do when you come back.
that's true. And one of the things at the Yukon Health Center that we know, so a bunch of us that have
Mhm.
had NDEs, we would walk down the hallway, and the lights would turn on and off, on the ceiling. And apparently it was just our energy was somehow, doing something to the lights. And it
That
wasn't
makes me
just me, it was a
smile.
number of people that was noticed. So
No, that's very cool. That's a cool story. I love hearing stuff like that. So thank you for sharing.
sure.
Hello, Bob. I was wondering, uh, were there different messages that you walked away with, I'll start that over. Uh, what message did you walk away with the first NDA? And what was the message you walked away with the second NDA? Were they similar,
Well,
complementary, or teaching highlighting new things for you to pay attention to?
the first one was that I was so introverted and being religious and just focused on my work and the fact that everything had to be logical, that I had a switch that if I was going to stay on earth I had to really help others. And so by going to various metaphysical holistic groups, the spiritualist church, I became this networker, and I really did help a lot of people by spreading the word about different groups. And then the second one was more like, uh, you've got the point, but if you're going to stay here still, you've got to do more. And I think maybe I was slacking off because more people were using email, but I got more involved again, and I tried to spread word of mouth. I would go to one event, and then I would say to everybody, "Oh, next week there's 3 different events going on." Word of mouth, and maybe I would have a flyer, but it's just like giving my personal touch. And then I would help different groups like shamanism. I put some shamans in touch with each other in central Connecticut. Yeah, I knew of them, and some I had taken a class with, but they didn't necessarily know of each other. And I got them to form like a little group to meet each other. So that was kind of promoting that one venue of healing or whatever.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious what two messages you took away.
Right. I know it's strange. I mean, some people on the other side don't want to come back. They're just so happy they're in bliss and unconditional love. But for me, it was like I spent my whole life, being a student, and now I want to use it. So,
So it sounds like you had a choice to stay if you wanted to. Is that accurate?
yes, yes. But if I changed, I could stay. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to.
Oh, I see. Oh, so you had the, wow. Um, I'm a card carrying member of the introvert society as well.
Okay.
And I think if someone asked me to change from being an introvert into an extrovert, I would have stayed. I would have stayed in heaven. I would have been
Okay.
like, no, I'm not doing that. So,
Well, I didn't really become an extrovert, but I became less of an introvert. Maybe I moved the dial right to the middle. And but I just introverted. I didn't get along socially with people that well because my father was in the army, and we moved from military base to military base. It was like every 12 to 18 months. And when we moved to a military base, he would go first and be there 3 or 4 months by himself, and then get the housing for us. So in those 3 or 4 months, I would go back to an aunt and uncle in Manchester, Connecticut, and stay with them. But then I would go into the schools in Manchester, and then I would go to this military base. And you're constantly changing schools. Either you're leaving or your friends are leaving. It's hard to make long-term friends when you're constantly moving physical locations. So I think that made me more of an introvert too.
oh, I understand.
I'm curious, what did you see when you crossed over?
Well, um, I was out of my body, so I was looking down at my body in the car, and then I don't know if I saw much in the sense I got this message that this is it for me. And that's when I started pleading with this higher body saying, hey, I don't want to die yet. I want to stay here and blah, blah, blah. I'm too young to die is what I said. And, I'm just, I've been a student all my life and now I'm starting to use the knowledge. And, that's when I got this message that if you're going to stay here. So I didn't really see a lot. I did not go through the tunnel myself.
I was just
It's funny when
curious. Yeah.
when I had a heart attack. Um, I don't remember. I was in one hospital and they transported me to another one because the one I was in doesn't do heart surgeries or anything. And I don't remember the trip to the other hospital. I don't remember being taken up to the cath lab. When I started to be aware again was when they went into my groin with a stent and I felt it all the way up. And it was this horrendous pressure. And I kept asking them if they were finished yet because it was just the pressure was horrible. And I remember at one point, I just looked up at the ceiling and I said, God, if you need to take me now, it's okay. I'll just help everybody from the other side. And I felt like I surrendered. I don't know if that would be considered an out of body or an NDE, but it just all of a sudden I just didn't care if I was there or not. But I stayed, and I to this day I believe that it was because of the hospice work that I do.
Wow. And for me, I mean, I was in the severe pain with the sciatic nerve, with a ruptured disc on both sides of the sciatic nerve. And, sometimes I wondered after that, did I make the right decision? Because it took them a year before they finally operated it. And I was dragging my foot sometimes, my leg, when I tried to walk. And, did I make the right decision being in all this pain when I could have stayed, maybe on the other side? And, because when I was out of my body, I had no pain. I felt unconditional love. Um, it was so peaceful.
Yeah, I think we can do that too here in the physical world without the shakeup to kind of choose not to be attached to what's going on. And I think that's part of the healing self is having that mindset that you're getting through it. So I like to hear the stories
And
because it gives us ideas. Yeah.
for me, I was always afraid of death. I was terribly afraid of death until I went through that whole thing with my mom, and then got into the whole spiritual world. Um, and now I'm not afraid of it at all.
Hmm. Very cool. Valerie, did you have any questions? You're still on mute. I think it's *6 on the phone. Or maybe I can ask you to unmute. Let me see if that works.
There.
There
I
you
was
go.
having some problems with my computer, so
Ah.
I'm on the phone now.
Okay.
But it was very interesting. I've always been interested in near-death experiences, and I've heard many stories, and I do believe that there is life after death. My dad was with my uncle at one point when he was getting ready to pass, and he, spoke of his wife who had already passed, and he saw her clearly and was talking to her during that time. And shortly thereafter, um, he was gone. My mom saw her father, and he was coming for her. And she spoke very clearly of that before she passed. So I'm a firm believer in that. And I was curious to hear what other stories others might bring to the table today. It was very interesting. Thank you
Great.
for having me.
Yeah. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone else? So, Katrina, you're a reader. You've probably read other people. What other stories might you share?
I mean, like I said, I feel like I have secondhand NDE experiences. it's 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 nothing ever firsthand. I think it's always similar. It's similar to Laura doing Reiki on someone, and then a grandma or somebody else pops in, and you're like, oh, I got to tell you that she said this or that or whatever. And it's not something that's all the time.
Yeah.
For me, it's seeing. I don't like to say ghosts, but I see people. I've had objects move with the passing of a person who walked through a wall, for example, in my bedroom. It's always for me like I know there's communication of people who have passed on. And
Yeah.
the way that I see it is always, the energetic body is there before the physical one, right? So
Yeah.
these beings, these people, they're the same. They're just without their bodies that are here, without their physical bodies. And we can still interact with them in different ways. And that extends for me to like the angels that I work with or other beings that I work with, because it's all energy. And that's me kind of trying to merge the scientific with the spiritual part, but
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is. It's all energy. It's just a different form.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's where it comes. It's fascinating. I know you're interested in the water messages too.
Yeah.
The crystal structure of water that's been blessed versus been cursed at.
Right. It's the energy that is infused throughout the water. Like,
Yeah.
that's how we empower objects. Like, that's how we do all kinds of things. And then when you think about it, when something is activated, it's just the energy, the molecules, all the things around it are just moving so much faster, so that you can barely see it versus
Yeah.
something that is slower, it's denser, it's moving slower than these other things. So for me, just think about the frequency that the angels and God and that they're operating on. And see, this is the geeked out me. It's just like, just imagine this being like oscillating at this really fast frequency, and that's just so much slower. So everything just looks different.
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, that now I'm gonna go work with water when we get out of here.
Yep. And Bob, you mentioned the telepathy. I've
Right.
seen a couple of interviews with the woman on the telepathy tapes, and from each season, apparently they've already got season 3 in the works, but she's growing and learning so many more things. So it's not just autistic non-speakers, it's anything, any animals included that you can
Wow, that's
speak with.
great.
Yeah. So we're all getting better. Terry's a big study of the quantum field, and that's kind of amazing too, so that you can just perceive it differently and it changes.
Exactly. It kind of lets us know that we really are the creators of our reality and that we don't all share the same reality unless we come in cooperation with each other, which is, I think, really evident in our society right now. You know, how very divergent the views are with the same set of facts.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, you know, for me, it's always been a struggle to try to figure out how to bring people together. Instead of forming groups around a common enemy, which it seems like we're very good at, how can we form a group around not dogma, not creed, not a guru, not an enemy, but form groups of like-minded people who want to grow together differently. So my vision has always been how, you know, we don't have to recite the same verses. We don't have to read the same authors, but yet we have such a diverse way of looking at things. If we could just find a group that wants to come to get together to share the way they look at things with no judgment. You don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree, but it's something else. And to know that that is part of the quantum, what they are experiencing exists.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to bring people together to share their vision, to first of all define their vision and then share their vision, and then have that be okay. And as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, you know,
Yeah.
have that vision be okay. So that's kind of my thought, and I think the ministry is a great place to do that. I think we have a lot of diversity of thought here,
Yeah.
and I'd like to see us keep growing by, you know, with bringing in people with other diverse interests, other
Yeah.
diverse thoughts. So, you know, our struggle has always been, how do we do that?
Yeah.
You know, how do we maintain, how do we, without having a guru or a common enemy or a dogma or a
Right.
creed, how do we bring people together?
Yeah.
And when I heard you talk about Bob, I just lit up when I heard you talk about being a networker, because I was like, um, maybe you have some thoughts on my vision. So I'd love to talk to you. I can give you my phone number or my email, and I'd love to pick your brain about how to do that, because you know, when we have conversations like today and like we've been having, there is no reason that 7 people should be here. You know,
Yeah.
there should be 70.
Yeah.
And so I think that trying to figure out how to grow those numbers and still maintain our integrity of not having dogma, not having creed, not having a common enemy, not having a guru, is the trick.
Okay. Yeah, we can exchange emails and, send messages back and forth. I mean, it's hard now. It's like, it seems like most of the organizations I belong to are getting smaller. It's hard, to attract new people to groups. I don't know if it's because it's like we're using Zoom and things like that. You lose something like when we used to meet at the Yukon Health Center in person. You were there, you could see each other, you could talk to each other. You really had a good feeling of how they felt in that. And now that we've gone to Zoom and that, we're taking a step away from that.
That certainly there's no face to face, definitely that's missing. But I think the energetic component, like Katrina was just speaking about, is still available, you know, to those who want to check into it.
Yeah,
So
and for my work, we do almost everything via Zoom. So I have people all over the world, and so there should be no reason we don't have 70 people, right? Because
Okay.
anybody can check in, except for maybe time zones that
Yeah.
don't work. But
and I agree with Bob though, being
yeah,
of the older ilk, like you said, back in the day, we used to, you used to
yeah,
sit next to somebody and you could tell if they had a bad day, a good day, if they were
Yeah.
going to do something good, if they were going to do
yeah,
something bad. You knew their family, you knew their dogs, you knew everything about them.
right.
As I throw my water bottle, you knew everything about them. And on Zoom, we get on, we're on for exactly 1 hour, and then we're off for exactly forever. And then we
Yeah.
come together for exactly 1 hour and then we're off. And so I think we could do better somehow of
Yeah.
the interplay in the meantime, but I'm just not sure what that looks like.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I think that's something that we could tease out and focus on maybe.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
And Bob, this will be on Zoom. Kevin puts all of our Sundays on YouTube, not Zoom, on YouTube. It's under the Madonna Interfaith Community.
Oh,
All
great.
of
Okay.
the sessions are on there.
So I can go and look at,
Mhm.
some previous sessions we've had and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. hmm Yeah, you're welcome to. And we've had some great stuff. I mean, I've learned so much
Yeah.
just by coming back. But so it is 1 o'clock, and Nikki, I don't want to take your thunder, but is it okay if I just pray us out really quick?
Yes.
Please do.
Mother, Father God, we are so pleased to have this opportunity to come together to share another aspect of your energy and to enrich our lives. We're so grateful that you allowed this meeting, and we're so grateful for the opportunity to continue these meetings and to grow them. So we ask that you help us to attract other people to us, people who will help to nurture your identity and help us to understand spirit even more than we do, and to help us to keep growing so that we can become closer and closer to you and bring earth to heaven and heaven to earth. And so it is.
So it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure having you. You're welcome back anytime. Valerie,
Thank
too.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
All right.
Yes, thank you for
Nice
coming, and
meeting you all.
tell your friends.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Have a wonderful
People-
week.
Bye-bye.
All
You
right.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.